Good, thank you. All right, welcome everyone to another episode of California Progressive Alliance and a Zoom meeting that we're having to discuss very important issues that are happening to California residents, and more importantly, things that people are doing to kind of help them survive during this pandemic and during trying times for a lot of young people. We're going to talk about student loan forgiveness and why it's such an important issue, not just for millennials, but even those of us in other generations. I won't mention which generation I'm part of, but many of us are also struggling with student loan debt, student loan forgiveness, and what we do. What's our next step? What does California do? What do the young people of California and the not so young people do to be able to move forward and find some sort of progress in terms of the next step in their lives, whether it be a mortgage, whether it be starting small businesses, whether it be just all the things that people want to do to progress in life. I'm joined by, maybe I'd like you all to introduce yourself, and we can start with Michelle Manos.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be back with CPA and talking about this really important issue.
Great. And
should
now,
should I say my bio or?
Sure, just a quick introduction.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm a longtime community organizer based in Los Angeles. I have what I think is an important story regarding why access to community college and why access to affordable education was important to me. But in the end, I also ended up saddled with student loan debt. And so, I want to add my voice to this conversation, help lift up the stories of people that are in even more debt than me. So I organize for justice. I'm a longtime resident of Los Angeles, co-founder of Bernie's Coffee Shop, and I'm with Urban Partners Los Angeles and the Shower of Hope currently. And I won't bore you with my whole activist resume, but thanks for having me back.
Thanks, Michelle. Ruskell, if you can introduce yourself.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having this. I've been involved in the community since my days as a student at Vallejo High School. I have grown up in the Bay Area, Vallejo, California, particularly for 30 years, and also an immigrant of the Philippines. I serve as a legislative aide to Javanka Beckles, who's currently an elected Alameda Contra Costa County Transit Director. And she's also was a Richmond City Council member before, and also served as a legislative aide to a statewide group called Save Our Seniors Network, where I'm working with former State Assembly member Mariko Yamada and senior statewide. And I previously served as Senator Bernie Sanders' Rules Committee appointee and delegate, and as a former elected official serving on the Vallejo School Board, working with constituents in whether it's in Vallejo or in Richmond or Berkeley. I would hear from constituents the concerns how they can afford to pay their health care and especially their student loans. So happy to help with the conversation this evening.
Excellent, Ruskell. Thanks so much for joining us. So basically the entire Bay Area, right?
Just Vallejo, Richmond, and Berkeley.
Okay. Karen, if you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role and how student loan forgiveness relates to you.
Sure. Hi, my name is Karen Hernandez, and speaking of Berkeley, I actually attended UC Berkeley and UCLA, so I racked up some student debt as well. I did have some scholarships to help me out, but I definitely understand the struggles of having student debt and the way it impacts my life as a first generation student. And so I'm here today to speak on that experience. And also I've worked with high school students and college students who find themselves in these situations. And I've been a peer counselor while I was in college, and I heard many folks struggling with, how are they going to eat and make sure that everything else is paid. So, it's a very real issue. And then after, now that we're in debt and graduated, we have the pandemic. And so I've definitely seen people struggle. I've volunteered during this pandemic as well with the food bank, Urban Partners LA, and worked with South Central Mutual Aid. So I've been active in LA trying to help folks who are struggling, who are in poverty. And, we do see folks who even have graduate degrees and undergraduate degrees that find themselves without housing. So I think when we look at the bigger picture, this is a symptom of the problem, but we need to really humanize, this issue and make sure that people see, that there are people behind this, not just numbers. So I actually ran for office as well for the LA Community College Board of Trustees this past election. And it's very important to me to make sure that students achieve their goals. And to me, that includes a holistic approach. How do we help our students in all aspects of their life? And in this, conversation, we're going to focus a lot on that debt that carries on and has long-term effects on people's lives. So thank you for having me, and happy to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michelle, Ruskell, and Karen. As you mentioned, it's amazing to see people seeking out very basic services, food and other types of emergency help when they have a college degree and are still trying to pay some of their student loan debt off. Prior to COVID, 1 million Americans defaulted on their student loans every year. That number has only risen sharply. 6 in 10 struggle with student loan debt as it is. And some 45 million Americans owe $1.7 trillion in student loan as of right now. And it's a huge issue. Ask anyone in the country, I think they said about 30 to 40% of young Americans between the ages of 21 and 35 say student loan debt is one of the most important electoral issues on their mind, one of their top priorities. And maybe we can start with that question. Right now, we understand as bipartisan politics go, the Democrats are debating with the issue of student loan debt. We currently have what's being called, I believe they're calling it a COVID-19 student loan forbearance, which is a temporary moratorium on people defaulting on their student loans. Yet the Democrats hold both the House and the Senate, both houses of Congress, and we see very little action on student loan. Maybe we can start with that question, and we can start with Michelle. What is the movement to bring justice and to alleviate the student loan debt issue? Where do we go from here? The Democrats, we know that the Republicans don't want to do anything about student loan, but the Democrats have been very open to the idea. Where do we go from here, and how do we lobby on behalf of ourselves to get some student loan forgiveness?
Well, forgive me, Ernesto, if you see me like chuckling in my little square in my Zoom, because, isn't it so like the Democrats to have everything they need and still fumble the ball, right? So I don't expect a lot from the Democrats, but I'm hopeful that they could perhaps unite around this one issue that is top of mind for so many people. Because I think that as we have like an awakening, a consciousness happening in our society, which has been happening for like perhaps the better part of the last or the most upcoming generation, I think the issue of student debt and the issue, I'm a millennial, right? Like we were the ones caught off guard here with this thing. The economy fell out from under us in 2008, right? As like for me, myself in my early 20s, like getting my career started, and all of a sudden there goes everything, right? With the housing crash and all the ripple effects from that. And then it was like turned around on us saying like, they're lazy, they can't get out of their parents' basements and things like that. And meanwhile, the statistics show that millennials are the most highly educated and the least able to advance generation in modern history, right? Since we've been a an industrialized nation. And so I think that what we're seeing now as the consciousness is awakening is that that's unsustainable economic, even if you have like conservative economics, like that's unsustainable economics, right? So you have to be able to look at it from that perspective. We have built a capitalist society, and if you can't actually access what you need in order to attain what they tell you to reach to attain, then you have a fundamental flaw in the design. And that is sort of in my mind, like what happened to millennials and what my hope, right? When you say, where do we go from here? We can start the conversation with that question if you want to. And I really think that I look towards the generation coming up behind us, right? Like Gen Z, I think, saw what happened to us and said, like, we do not accept these conditions on many different issues, the climate and so many different things. But I think student loan debt and the idea that, you can take all the right steps and still end up unable to, in the very basic way, unable to feed yourself, right? I work for the Shower of Hope. I see young people who live in their cars that come and take shower in our shower trailer and they go to work or they go to school, right? I mean, this is the reality of what people are facing right now. And when they go to school, they're hoping that education will get them something, out of that situation. And right now we can't promise them that that's the case, and that has to change.
Ruskell, maybe you can tell us about some of the proposals that are being thrown out there. $10,000 a year in student loan forgiveness would go a long way to help a lot of struggling young people who are trying to start their careers, trying to take that next step, as we had spoken about, whether it be home ownership or, nowadays it's like small condo ownership or, whatever their next step might be. Do you think that's a feasible thing to get the Democrats to accept?
Yeah, I think so. If I remember from Assemblymember Yamada, when she served the state assembly from 2008 to 2014, they were working on the middle class scholarship for California, which passed in 2012, 2013, which was like the first step. And then the next step is, of course, student loan forgiveness. $10,000 is a step, but it needs to go far-reaching. The Democrats have campaigned as part of their platform, those that ran for state office, state legislative office, and Congress. Now's the time to deliver, because we're less than a year away that those seats will be up. If they do not deliver, we risk losing the House. So it's time to deliver. Being a capital junkie myself, had to speak at many Assembly and Senate committee hearings in past years, because I do remember one hearing I spoke at in 2012, 2013, concerning this issue. One of the bills at the time, which was proposed by Senator Noreen Evans, was a tax on oil extraction to lower or probably get rid of tuition at our universities. Unfortunately, I do remember that legislation died in that committee that day. So what it'll take, as us here on this call and us in the community, we have to request meetings with our legislators, especially in Congress. I would ask to meet with the legislative aide or legislative director for that member of Congress that's working on this issue, and ask them, will that member commit to supporting that legislation? So it's time to count the votes, as they say, and get those commitments.
Yeah, so a lobbying effort that could counter the creditors and the people that own the loan companies, right? That are doing their own very successful efforts to lobby. I was just looking up some information that in 2005, student loan companies successfully lobbied to make private student loans nearly impossible to discharge in almost every single case, whether it was financial hardship or whether it was bankruptcy even. And between 2000 and 2004, loan companies tripled their campaign contributions, which ties, of course, the issue of campaign finance reform to that of student loan debt. Let's move over to Karen. Karen, maybe you can talk to us about what you think is a good strategy in combating, or rather in approaching some of these Democratic Congress members and getting them to understand, like, hey, we have a real issue here, and even though you might not get the same campaign contribution from some of these student loan companies, this is what your constituents are really feeling.
Sure, thank you. I think what we've seen in recent times, especially during this pandemic, is people taking action and really, making their voice heard by protesting and by going to show a visible way that, that they're not happy with something, that they want to change. And so, we saw that with, BLM, we saw that with just a lot of the situations going on. People are tired of it. So honestly, I do think, yes, there is a way to do it by maybe writing letters and, gathering, testimonials of students, but also showing that, people are going to take action and show up and demand that change if, these other ways of trying to basically, advocate for student loan forgiveness doesn't work. I think, it is time to put pressure on the Biden administration. We do see that, there were a lot of promises during the campaign. A lot of people voted because he talked specifically about student loan forgiveness. And, we don't see that action yet. So, and $10,000 is not enough. So we definitely would need to have another program that's going to really take care of the majority of that debt. I think right now it's unrealistic to expect that people in the next 5 or 10 years are going to be able to repay back these, very large sums of money. A lot of people owe over $100,000. I mean, I'm fortunate that I had a lot of scholarships, but I still have over $10,000. And so I can only imagine what it was like for a lot of folks that didn't have maybe the time or knowledge to look into other ways to pay for school. And now they're stuck with this debt, plus maybe a mortgage, plus, their family, they may have children. So the bills don't go anywhere. They've been piling up over this pandemic, and we see people needing rent relief, which is another huge issue, right? So realistically, I do think that the majority, 90%, 100% would be ideal, but really getting rid of these debts, especially because we see a lot of corporate bailouts. We see a lot of money that is available for other things. So why can't it be available for our working class, our middle class, which is unfortunately disappearing? We have really a struggle here of the very, very rich and people who continue to struggle as this pandemic carries on. We see small businesses going out of business. And so exactly, we need to just take action. And I think a lot of that action does need to look more in the form of maybe some type of protest, because enough is enough and the message isn't getting across with conversations. So that's just my take on it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Karen. I appreciate that. And I think one of the statistics that I was reading is 18 to 20-year-old voters backed Joe Biden based on that promise that, hey, we are going to do something about the student loan debt. I think in certain cases he was recorded saying we're going to cancel it. In other places he had mentioned we're going to severely reduce and help people that have substantial student loan debt. And here we are, and all we have is a temporary postponement of payments, which I think another statistic that I was reading that I thought was really interesting is that the great majority, almost 60% of student borrowers say if they had to start repaying that debt next month they wouldn't be able to, which is kind of a shocking figure, but it's not really surprising given the pandemic, given that a lot of millennials and younger people are facing unemployment levels of over 40% in some states. And so that's another issue that we'll definitely have to address. So I think the one thing that we all agree on is the time is now. The Democrats run the House and the Senate. It's time now. Joe Biden has made his promises about student loan, and student loan was going to be one of the top of on the top of his list of priorities. So it's something that needs to happen now. Of course, we all have our different ideas as to how we do this. Do we help in lobbying? Do we call our state legislators and our Congress members? Do we get on the streets and start phone campaigns and all these different strategies that can all get us closer to what it is we need, which is a student loan debt? Maybe we can talk about the next issue, issues that are correlated, if you will, to student loan debt. We've got the issues of public banking in the state of California and how that would put a dent in some of these student loan companies and their ability to have almost unfettered access to our lawmakers, who in turn run all these bills that end up going nowhere, right? They're bills that are written and we discuss them and they debate them endlessly in the halls of Congress and our state legislators' offices, but nothing ends up coming of it. We still owe $120,000 or so in student loan debts, and those debts just keep rising and rising. So maybe we can talk about a little bit more some of these correlated issues. We've got public banking. We've also got the issue of campaign finance reform, which I'd mentioned earlier, which is a big one because some of these student loan companies understand that, hey, if we pay back into some of the coffers of our lawmakers, guess what? It's going to mean less change in terms of student loans. Let us do our thing. Let us handle our industry. If students take on big amounts of loans, they have to pay it back. It almost reminds me a little bit, if you let me go on a tangent for just 1 second, it almost reminds me of the debate of the fight for 15, which was always $15 for someone who's not college educated, who doesn't have a degree, who doesn't have any quote unquote useful skill or technical skill, yet you're going to pay them the same amount that you would a college graduate. And it's the same type of argument, which at its root suggests that people just don't deserve, that people have to put in a whole lot of work before they're able to get some sort of living wage. And it seems to me the same thing. Like, why are we gonna eliminate their debt? They willingly took on a huge college university debt. They have to pay for it. It's their responsibility. So maybe we can get into some of those correlated issues, primarily that of public banking and the one of campaign finance reform, and any other ideas that you guys might have. So let's start with Ruskell.
Yes, being a legislative advocate for many years, there was one of the bills I was working with the statewide group, Save for Seniors earlier. That bill was to protect seniors in home care facilities from not being evicted during this pandemic. And that was an urgency bill. It required 2/3 vote of the legislatures. So there was a lot of work to talk to these legislators. We had to identify, and it applies to any issue, especially the things we're fighting for. We need to identify those legislators that are on the fence. And yeah, there are some legislators we requested to meet with their staff to ask the pointed question: will you support this bill? And yeah, there was some staff that, well, they'll just like make excuses or just put you down in a rabbit hole. But you have to keep testing them, because usually the members' legislative staff makes recommendations on bills to vote on. So just getting their staff, building those relations like now to get that commitment goes a long way. We were able to get that won that particular bill out of the legislature, 2/3 vote. That's hard. Unfortunately, the governor vetoed it, so that's still so that was a gut punch. But it's possible. It's so that's one, and also two, campaign finance. Yes, we need to identify whether state legislators or members of Congress what special interest money they receive, especially from the financial industry, the loan industry. And you need to run some candidates to run against them, because being a former school board member, my policy, and then working for two elected officials, we share the same policy. We reject 1 penny of corporate money, special interest money. So a campaign finance reform is much needed, like at all levels. Like when I was working for Berkeley Councilmember Cheryl Davila, their campaign finance policy was individual donations maximum is only up to $200-something. They don't candidates that run in a city office for Berkeley cannot take corporate money. So those kind of policies, whether it's Berkeley or anywhere else in the country, they can be introduced at your city council, your school board, college district, or even the state legislature and Congress. We need to find a champion, whether it be a candidate running for office or someone or a member of Congress, and make sure we got to support, organize a lot of people, get the meet with other legislators' offices and their staff, get that commitment to make sure that bill gets out, passes and gets to the desk for a signature.
So Michelle, thanks for that, Ruskell. Michelle, maybe you can tell us about what some of the strategies that you guys have employed. When I say you guys, I mean all the different organizations that you've worked with. Yeah, the whole plethora of organizations that you've been a integral part of. I know that a lot of your members and maybe some of the organizing committees there think that these acts and these bills get nowhere. A lot of discussion, as we mentioned, but nothing concrete gets done. Not even that $10,000 per year loan forgiveness. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, thank you. And, Ruskell, thank you for like the legislative breakdown, because it's really important. And, it's hard to understand sometimes. So that's why I enjoy participating on discussions like this, and always appreciative of CPA for creating the space, because we need to break these things down into like digestible bites so that people can understand them, and so that people can engage with them, right? Because this is a difficult and dry topic. It's not like perhaps one of the sexier topics that you can get people engaged on and super riled up about. You talk about student loans and it sounds like bills. But we need people to understand that this is something that is uniquely out of control, right? And it has uniquely saddled young people in this country with the inability to advance. And it has uniquely pitted immigrants into conditions that are unsustainable, and even more of a ladder to climb just to try to find an equity in this country, right? And so when we think about how these are the types of systems that like oppress the already oppressed, and they oppress people further, and they add to the burden of trying to advance, right? So like long gone is the idea that generations are supposed to do better than their parents, and that's the American dream, is doing a little bit better than our parents so that we can provide a little bit better for our kids. And that's just not like the reality of most families in this country. And if we're going to present ourselves that way, then we have to be able to hold that door open. So something as crucial and fundamental, not just to an economic existence, but also to our humanity and to our holistic nature as people, as education, right? Like I want a carpenter to go get a BA in art history if that's what they want to do, right? Because that's a passion to them. We're so far from that kind of discussion at this time. The discussion is around, will my career pay for the cost of an education? And right now the answer is no in a lot of cases. So when you talk about what is the strategy, I love that question because as an organizer, my perspective has long been we need all of these strategies working together, right? We need people protesting in the streets so that the ones who are doing the negotiating, in the closed door rooms can point to those protesters and go, you see those people? They're mad. Like you need to be able to play off of each other and understand each other's role. And that's why I don't like when like sort of leftists pit different styles of activism and volunteering and organizing against each other, because all of these roles are needed. We need like grassroots media outlets and discussions like this, right? So that we can highlight the work that's being done and invite people to get involved. And then also we need to be able to, when I say like, see those people, they're mad, that's literally a negotiating tactic. That's like, hey, yes, we can speak to those people and they will listen to us, but only so far. And, the people in the streets, they are also in the college classrooms and they also understand what is happening to them and the situations in which we find ourselves. You can't pull the wool over their eyes. So if I'm negotiating, I can say, we can't go back to them with nothing, or we can't go back to them with fluff. So you've got to give us something, right? So that enables us, like when we talk about incremental versus fundamental change, we're talking about incremental until we get fundamental. Because we have people suffering today, right? Like we have unhoused people sleeping, they're going to sleep on the street tonight, right? We have people who are dying from lack of healthcare tomorrow morning, right? So yes, fundamental, but what are we doing right now? And so when we talk about pressuring the Biden administration and pressuring our elected officials, they know as well as we do that as soon as we get something, we're asking for the next thing. But it's important to understand that we continue to engage in that, because the only other alternative is to allow this exploitation and lack of opportunity to continue. And I think a lot of people, more and more people, are waking up and saying, we're not going to let that happen right in front of our faces anymore. Student loans in particular, because that's our kids, right? You come for people's kids and you're kind of messing with families, right? And so that's the framing I think that has worked, when it's like, people are watching their children not be able to get ahead. They're watching how it impacts their ability to provide not just the basics, but also when you have to say no to your kid, like you can't have that birthday party, you can't join that club. And the reason is because of money. And it's more and more and more of these things all the time, right? And of course, the worst of it being, for instance, when I see a parent with kids show up at our showers because they don't have a place to shower because they live in their suburban, like that's the end result of some of these things that we're talking about.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I mean, that's there are real life consequences to debt, and there's real life consequences to the debt that someone takes on when they're just trying to improve their lives and improve the lot of their lives. And another interesting statistic was how Black and Latinx communities are bearing more of the brunt of the student loan crisis, and that especially it's Black and Latina women that are suffering in terms of taking on such a huge amount of debt that in many cases, I mean, we already know the racial disparity and the racial income gap and the racial, just the amount of money that people have in terms of assets. Karen, maybe you can join in this conversation about, what it means as a Latina, what it means to be a member of the Latinx community, and a community that doesn't have a whole lot of history in terms of college education and college degree opportunities, and what it means to now have fallen behind and trying to catch up on student loan debt.
Yes, thank you for that question. Definitely, it's an issue that, is intersectional. We have so many layers, as, folks have mentioned. people are dealing with, not just their student debt, but maybe their healthcare debt, maybe other types of debt, right? But especially for the Black and Brown communities, we've seen in this pandemic the way it's impacted these communities as well. So we do see this overlap of compounding stress, compounding issues. And so we do need to address that. And I definitely agree, whether it's policy, whether it's protesting, something has to get done. We have many families struggling. I know folks that are part of the Great Resignation as well. So not just dealing with, having debt, but how are you going to pay that debt if you can't even stand your job, if it's taking a mental health toll, if it's taking different kinds of tolls on your life and body. And, to be quite frank, I found myself in that situation. So I'm currently in the process of looking for something new, but it's a reality that has crossed my mind. Once January 2022 is here, what am I going to do? Will I have a job? Will things work out? And, I don't have dependents, but I know many of my, many folks I went to college with they do have dependents. And I also know of people that are right on the brink of resignation. I've had many, many conversations specifically with Latina women about the impacts of, working remotely. We've heard of, the folks working in person and how it's had a physical challenge for safety reasons, right? Being in person, but remotely, you still have a lot of challenges as well, depending on your employer. And as we know, this is a very, very real situation, the Great Resignation. So I would say, it's urgent now more than ever. To be quite frank, when I look at my finances, I don't prioritize it because I'm always hopeful that, maybe one day we're going to get the student, forgiveness that we've been hearing about for years. I actually was in college when I first heard about reforms for student debt. And I went to Washington, D.C. With some other ASUC members at Berkeley, where we were advocating for SAFRA, which was the Student Aid Financial Relief Act. And it did pass, but yet we still continue to have this issue. So that wasn't enough. Sometimes the policies we have in place are not enough. And it's frustrating when we hear politicians keep saying and promising, and then years go by and where is the actual, benefit to me, like directly where I can see a relief in my finances. And that hasn't happened to my knowledge. So I would just say that, this is just my experience, but I think many, many folks are definitely struggling to keep up with the student loan debt. And it's unfortunate because you are offered these student loans when you're basically not a full adult, you're still developing, yet now that you're an adult, you can't even qualify for a house loan. I've tried to even, go that route. And so it has impacted my finances and my opportunities because I've had struggles to pay my debt. I have had low paying jobs, even with a master's degree, because many places, including nonprofits that help benefit the community, don't often have a very good starting salary. They don't often have, good hourly pay. They're not well paid jobs, unfortunately. So, many of us find ourselves juggling multiple jobs. I actually left a very comfortable position compared to many other jobs. I was working in local government, but I had to prioritize myself. I had to prioritize my well-being. And, that's something we find ourselves in, really taking mental health more seriously because we're in a pandemic that carries on. I mean, we're almost at 2 years. So the urgency is there. And I would just say that, yeah, like Michelle said, we have many families who are unhoused, and people who have, college degrees are included in that. I know when I was volunteering at the food bank, there were college students in line. You have freshmen, sophomores. In the LACCD, the Los Angeles Community College District, in 2016, 1 in 6 students were homeless or had experienced homelessness, 1 out of 6, and that's only gotten worse. We don't have the most current data, but these are students living in their cars, and they're not even graduated. Imagine once they graduate, it's not so easy sometimes to enter the labor market, especially, when you're just graduating. People want years of experience. It's like, unless they take a chance on you, it's very difficult to make it into a really high paying position. So we do have a lot of intersectionalities and a lot of issues, and especially with folks that have family members impacted by COVID. The costs and the bills are real when somebody passes away or someone's in the hospital. So we know that those numbers have heavily impacted the Latinx and African American communities, right? During the pandemic, they've been hit the hardest. So I think looking at the bigger picture, there's a lot to consider.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that. I mean, I think having a college degree doesn't exempt you from substance abuse and food insecurity and the rising rent crisis and the mortgage issues and all of these other issues that people in general in society are dealing with and struggling with. Having substantial student loan and not being able to have any type of forgiveness or assistance with it isn't helping matters. You mentioned the Great Resignation. How do you tie that into to the student loan debt issue?
Yes, I feel like especially the millennial generation, and we'll probably see Gen Z doing this as well, because they're I feel very active and taking action and doing something about the problems they see. I think I find myself in a mix with colleagues who are kind of like, let's just, suck it up and do the best we can. And others that are like, no, we're not going to put up with this. We deserve better. Where our labor rights are being violated. And, these conversations are happening behind the scenes. They may not be happening at the workplace, but they're happening, with each other, with people you trust. And I would just say that, yes, I think a lot of people like me, I'm 31 and first generation student. And so I do think a lot of people from my background and other different ethnic backgrounds find themselves struggling to make that decision of, how can I put up with, a very demanding and perhaps even abusive workplace, or do I move into something else? And that's not always easy to have something lined up, but I just know that a lot of people from my generation are part of that Great Resignation, and it's because of these multiple factors: the hours, the lack of humanity, really, when it comes to looking at your employees, because sometimes the jobs, the job responsibility keeps piling on. You have people leaving, so then that makes it so that the people who do stay get more and more work when the company's not hiring, for example. And a lot of people are not hiring, sometimes based on their budget, and they say, oh, well, we're in the pandemic, we can't hire. So it's those types of situations, I think, where a lot of people are just really fed up when they're not being looked at as a whole person, but just as, what can you produce for me? And so when you're in that situation, you have to make a decision. And I think a lot of people are making the decision to leave and start their own business and are curious about starting their own business. And that was actually something that's crossed my mind. And even looking at what are alternatives to renting. People are looking into the tiny homes and looking to move out of state. I mean, this is a reality a lot of folks are facing. Can I even have a family in this city? Can I have a family in this state? And, people around my age are considering those things. As you get older, that's a decision that comes along. So I think with the resignation, it's tied into it that way. So.
Absolutely. I mean, we're here to talk about student loan forgiveness, so we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. But I do know that Michelle worked with the Bernie Sanders campaign, and you're active on the grassroots front of that campaign, where one of the promises that actually captivated a lot of young people was free college and free university. Maybe you can talk about that. I mean, the California Master Plan back in the 60s had promised everyone access to high quality and free tuition-free education, yet we've seen time and time again, how that's kind of, withered away to nothing. Maybe you can tell us about your experience, Michelle, with talking to young people and getting them excited about college free, free tuition and free community college and things like that.
Yeah, well, it's not just Bernie Sanders. Also, we worked to help pass free community college here in California. So first it was 1 year, then it was 2 years of free community college. We worked locally with Assemblymember Miguel Santiago on that at the time. And so, who's also working on public banking that we mentioned. So, what we try to do is identify as best we can those who are in seats of power, elected officials, appointees, and things like that, who will be allies in the issues that we care about. And, we have found that, for me in particular, I'll say like the thing that brought me to Bernie Sanders and the things that brought us all together, like affordable education and healthcare and anti-war and all the things, right? Like Bernie Sanders can be considered at this point one of the many influxes into the progressive movement, right? Like one of those big umbrellas that brought a lot of people in. People identify with that moment that happened, right? And so many of us will always find our roots in the Bernie movement because of the issues that Bernie Sanders as an idea like encompasses. But in practice, it means that we have to continue our steadfast commitment to bringing those issues, in particular the ones that require like political action, right? Like moving through the legislative process, right? Like Ruskell was saying, um, it's like this committee and that you'll see, like if you follow public banking, you see the announcements like public banking passes like 400 times. What are they talking about? It's all these different committees and it's got to go through, it's got to get approval over here, it's got to get one more vote over there. So it's a painstaking process. And that's why, like, and I'm not the one, right? Like, holy hell, like, props to all of y'all that sit in those rooms and get gaslit by the Democrats and the Republicans all the time, right? And like, no one, like, I know the feeling of like, no one trusts you because you won't join a faction kind of thing, So, but we need people with both the strong stomach and the thick skin that can slog through that stuff and make sure that the language is correct, that people are not being cut out and left behind, that we don't have white supremacist patriarchy written into our new laws that we have hope for right now and stuff like that. Because that will easily happen if we're not paying attention. And there will easily be backdoors and corporate money and all the things that create the instability in the laws that then all of a sudden things are watered down, right? And they don't do what we thought they were going to do, like medical marijuana in California kind of becoming a giveaway to these big grower companies and things like that, while Black and brown people still sit in prisons for a couple grams, right? So we have fundamental differences or inequities in all of these things, and the only thing that really will address it is when we all pay attention. And that's why I say it does take all of us, because there will come a time when those who are negotiating in the back rooms all the time, like doing like the coffee and the late nights and all that stuff, they're gonna need us on like a calling campaign or a flyering campaign or whatever the time comes where it's like, okay, like we have a big moment coming. We've done all this work. All these people have done all this incredible work, and now it's time for you to get involved. And those moments are so crucial because when you're like sort of political organizers go ahead and reach out and ask for that public support, that's the time that we have to like flood in, because it means that we have an opportunity. So I stay registered a Democrat, like to help the homies in the A-Dems and stuff like that, because that stuff is needed. I don't necessarily like identify with the Democratic Party as a political entity that represents me, but I do see that we have some people that are sort of waging war within the Democratic Party to try to bring these issues to the left. I don't expect that we'll ever be able to take over the way that perhaps some have the hope to, but I do think we can impact issue by issue, week to week, year to year. We can impact, the things that affect the daily lives of ourselves, our family members, and our neighbors. And the Biden administration did make a whole slew of promises that have been, as I just described, like watered down and peeled off until it's a kind of a nothing burger. But the only thing that's my dog, sorry. The only thing that works is when we all pay attention and get involved. And I'll stop there.
Absolutely. Yeah. We can hear the dog in the background. That's great. Yeah,
he's agreeing with me.
Yeah, he had something to add to the conversation. Ruskell, do you think we're ready to storm the state capitol with our pitchforks and torches, and let people know, hey, this is an important issue. We're ready for this right now. You have the power in the state legislature as well as in Congress. Democrats, help us out. Do something to cancel this student loan debt.
Yes, and just a heads up, there's a Senate committee hearing on government organization. The agenda has yet to be posted. I plan to attend that. That's next Tuesday. It's on the Senate's website, as well as the other upcoming committee schedules. And then January is when the state legislature starts up again. They're going to be, and they're in the process of moving to a new building, because some of the committee rooms that we're used to, for some of us that attend those committee hearings, they're going to be in a new building like nearby. Yeah, it's time. We cannot wait for incremental measures. $10,000, that's one thing, one step, but that's not enough. We cannot afford that anymore. The constituents, I talked to some constituents recently. One of them who is a journalist who went to Berkeley's journalism graduate school, and she lives out of her RV in Berkeley, and I've worked with her on some getting the city of Berkeley, along with Councilmember Davila at the time, to stop the city of sweeping these encampments in RVs. So it's we gotta knock down the door of the offices and halls of members in Sacramento and in DC, and especially hold their staff to the feet to the fire. Being a staffer myself for an elected official, I see it, both sides, and the ways to and also see the insight of how they operate. So I hope what I shared as a staffer is helpful, because if the people that we voted to elect, if they don't deliver, then it's time for us to step up and run against them. It's we need to elect candidates at all levels who will not accept one penny of special interest money. Especially do not elect candidates and do not support candidates who accept money from the loan industry, the financial industry, real estate, and all the above.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Ruskell. Karen, maybe we can follow up with you. Maybe give us some final remarks as we're here at the top of the hour. And again, for those people that are watching us, this is the California Progressive Alliance and a student loan forgiveness discussion that we're having with three incredible activists that are doing a lot in their neighborhoods of California, doing a lot to bring about change. Karen, maybe you can give us some final thoughts.
Sure. I wanted to touch on campaign finance reform. I think this is definitely an important issue where we need to see major changes, and that may include, the Supreme Court involved in this. I know we have from 2010 Citizens versus United, right? And so we have a lot of issues Citizens United versus Federal Election, I think, Committee. So I need to double check the title. I had looked it up, but I was looking at my notes. I just wanted to share that, at the end of the day, the way that campaigns are funded is fundamentally set up to enable politicians to look at that special interest money because it's just so tempting. It's so much money that corporations can donate. And so that's a really huge issue. We have seen more candidates take pledges to not take corporate donations, which is great. I think we see that coming a lot from these very strong progressives within the Democratic Party. And, we need to see more, but I think at the end of the day, when the legislation changes and if there's a way to really limit that amount and their influence, we're going to see greater legislative changes because they're not going to have to cater to those special interests. So that may be increasing the matching funds, that may be limiting the exact amounts that corporations can donate and how many can donate, and the PACs, maybe more regulations on political action committees. And then also we need to see more involvement of young people, of people from the community. From my experience, it was very challenging to run, and Michelle can share that, I'm sure Resco too. And, it's hard when you're grassroots. It's hard when you're a member of your community. You've lived there your whole life, and you really want to get involved. And then you realize there's so many layers and so many hoops and dances you have to do to even get people to look at your website or pay attention to you. And it does come down to money and campaign financing. Even when it comes to endorsements, they look at how much money have people donated to you, and then they see whether you're viable or not. And, I can speak to my experience of raising very little money, having a lot of people support me and donate their time. And that's what really helped us get, really close. We got to second place, but it was a community effort. So I would just say that's huge. And we do need to make these changes as soon as possible. So I hope that the Biden administration and the Democrats can really reflect and do something, because people are disappointed in their leadership, and we continue to see young people that lack engagement and are losing hope when it comes to politics. And that's very disheartening, because we need to have our young people involved. They're our future leaders. They're going to hold these seats of power. And so if they're not engaged, if it's not something they know how to even connect to, it makes it easier for folks that may have a special agenda and more time on their hands and more resources. So I'll end with that.
Thanks so much, Karen. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you reminding us about the SAFAR Act. And I know the Brennan Center has a page on student loan forgiveness, and they're pushing the For the People Act, which they say would enact a small donor public financing, which would allow candidates to rely less on wealthy donors and more and special interest groups and more on individual face-to-face meets. Michelle, I'm going to let you do the final remarks, and maybe you can tell us about what you think is the future.
Well, I just want to, you may have seen my face, I fangirl when Karen talks about her run for the LACCD board, because she was running against the chair of the board at that time, and we ran on a slate. I say we, but I feel like they did so much of the work, and I was invited to be a participant, and I hope that I pulled my weight at that time. But Karen, dang, she got close. She got close enough that we all got excited and inspired, this is a possibility, because it's important to understand that these systems of power are entrenched. And these things real change only happens when we all come together. So, I know that the people on this call are some of the movers and shakers, and I'm excited to be in contact with you, Ruskell, because you're, way far in the north and we're way far in the south, but, through CPA and networks that are committed to connecting Californians, we continue to come together. And I think that's wonderful. I will just briefly say that, when I was looking at my master's options, I had a choice between a 2-year program at UCLA and a 1-year program at Stanford. And UCLA offered me money and Stanford didn't, but I knew I wanted to stay in California. And I can tell you that if you're looking at these options based on like what's going to pay for itself, we're not approaching education properly, right? And when I made that decision, I don't know that it paid off, it paid itself off, right? But I'm still young. As I said, I'm a millennial. So I'm hoping that through our collective change together, we can continue to create opportunities that will put the focus back on the value of knowledge and the value of coming together to learn things and understand history and science. And, you know, some of our oldest institutions that are so problematic, they also are the ones that house wells of knowledge, and people deserve access to them without being saddled with a lifetime of debt. So thank you again to everyone on this call, and thank you to CPA. And if I can, I'll plug CPA is going to have their next annual convention in March, and I encourage everyone to watch out for that. It'll be an in-person and Zoom hybrid event, and it's bound to have a lot of good information.
Thanks so much for that, Michelle, Ruskell, and Karen. You guys were wonderful. Thanks for taking part in this discussion. Again, this has been the California Progressive Alliance and a student loan forgiveness discussion. And as Michelle had finished saying, we want to make education accessible to all. In order for it to be accessible, it has to be affordable. And there has to be ways to, to keep people from taking on and incurring such huge amounts of debt. And that's what this discussion was all about. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you being part of this call.
Thank you.
Thank you.